Hello, welcome to part 2 of StarFox Dark Timeline. I'm your host, DWL52. If you haven't seen or heard the first clip, don't worry, there will be a link in the description. Now, without further delay, let's get into it. 2291, Massive Government Reforms. With so much damage occurring from the Visitors' War, issues of governmental reform once again came to the forefront of Lilat politics. During the war, the Supreme General of the Reformed Cornerian Defense Force acted more like a president or prime minister rather than just a military advisor or leader. Large portions of the population wanted to stray from Platus's reforms, citing the Visitors' War as proof that his idealistic ways were not good for the Lilat system as a whole. After a great deal of debates, the world governments ultimately settled on returning to a revised version of the Platus's government, citing that, invaders aside, it was overall working well for the people of Corneria and the colonies. The end of 2291. This is called the Porcus Papers. While the world struggled to rebuild, civil unrest continued to be a big problem. Very few families did not lose a loved one in the war, and infrastructures were slow to rebuild. This meant travel, healthcare, and other necessities were sometimes hard to get in times of need. The rebuilding was moving as quickly as it could, but it was not fast enough for some. The oldest son of General Herbert Porcus, a Francis Porcus, started to disseminate anti-government writings, which came to be known as the Porcus Papers. These papers heavily criticized the rebuilding efforts and blamed the government's cleaning of Platus's ideals as the reason for any and all lingering problems after the war. Francis Porcus was attempting to stir rebellion, but all he did was forever shame the Porcus name. 2292. Porcus's capture and the Venom Exodus. As time went on, the Porcus Papers became darker and darker in tone and meaning. They outright called for acts of terrorism which spurred hate crimes, uprisings, and riots. Ultimately, Francis Porcus was captured, tried, and convicted of treason. Thanks to Francis, the family name which had saved Lilat from the Sadao was now reviled and besmirched. Luckily for Porcus, the death penalty had long been abolished in the Lilat system. He and his closest followers, including his middle brother Andrew, were exiled to Venom. It was the court's judgment that Porcus and his followers would spend the rest of their lives working to restore Venom to a more livable state. However, the Porcus Papers were too intoxicating to many. His call for return to capitalism and to societies that favored survival of the fittest proved to be incredibly enticing to many, who still felt that the current socialist government was weak. Thousands of Cornerians voluntarily left the new Lilat government to join Porcus on Venom, or to make their own settlements on unclaimed asteroids, dwarf planets, or wherever they could. Ultimately, much to the government's dismay, instead of dooming Porcus to exile, they gifted him a planet to call his own. 2292 through 2322, the Facturing. Not a particular incident per se, but a recognized time period known as the Facturing. During the years after the Venom Exodus, rather than argue in court or council meetings, the de facto answer to disputes with the government became to leave one's home and start anew away from said government. For a time, the Cornerian governments tried to aid these people and show that they were still considered citizens, but those who left often would refuse that aid, wanting to stand on their own and have nothing to do with the Cornerian officials. This created a rather soft schism in Lilat society at large. The solar system was slowly dividing into the inner, middle, and outer colonies. Many feared that a stellar civil war loomed on the horizon. 2301, Birth of a Race. The Gaines Triana Union succeeded in creating a thinking machine that was simply dubbed Unit 5532. Unlike its counterparts and similar models, this particular unit displayed free thinking and personality. Each unit after 5532 continued to show similar independent thought and personality. Rather than become a slaver, the corporation's president decided to push for civil recognition of robot rights, and on Tovi 23rd, the first sentient robot, Unit 5532, gained his rights as a citizen, making the birth of a new race of people, the robots. 2306, the Resurrection Project. Cornerian scientists successfully created a perfect clone of the first species to go extinct during the Great Trade Wars from buried remains. Prior to this, scientists had managed to restore some species from preserved DNA gathered after the war, but many species were not sampled prior to going extinct. However, Dr. Linda Alrus and her team managed to bring the yellow chew back from extinction. They not only saved the species, but managed to incorporate enough genetic diversity to ensure natural propagation. Their achievement is hailed as a miracle of science and the start of the Resurrection Project, a massive scientific endeavor to roll back many of the losses the planet had suffered in its more violent past. 2307. Talcoran Plague is finally cured. Dr. Elsa Catterton managed to sequence the greatest disease to ever plague Cornerian and develops a successful vaccine. The Talcoran Plague killed over 278 million people over the course of history. Thanks to Dr. Catterton's efforts, after 2308, the disease was finally eradicated. 2311. The Anomaly is born. The brilliant scientist Dr. Andros causes the death of pilots James and Vivian McLeod when they volunteer to launch his device, which would demonstrate a new form of energy production that he dubbed the Andros fusion reaction. Andros had insisted that the device needed to only be set off a few thousand kilometers away from Corneria, but James and Vivian chose instead to take it well beyond Corneria's orbit. The resulting explosion created a rift of instability and cost the two pilots their lives. 2312 through 2313, the Andros Trial. Was such a spectacular failure, Andros was temporarily relieved of his duties at the Defense Force Space-Time Laboratories, pending an investigation into the explosion. Andros contended that the tragedy was merely the result of unforeseen complications and demanded to return to work. However, his supervisor, Commander Pepper, felt differently and launched a full-scale criminal investigation. Andros immediately went to the press and rallied the people to his defense, calling the newly stated investigation a witch hunt. Commander Pepper's judgment turned out to be accurate. Over the course of the investigation, it was discovered that Andros, the world's most prominent and gifted scientist, was actually a traitor responsible for creating numerous accidents with military technology. His fusion reactor was actually meant to create an artificial singularity to destroy Carnaria. Thankfully, the device failed and Andros was arrested for high treason. The Andros trials started on the 19th of Sambara and quickly became the trial of the century. It played out like a bad soap opera. It was revealed that Andros was the adopted son of Herbert Porcus II, youngest son of Herbert Porcus, and brother to the usurper Francis Porcus. Andros' father hated the government that exiled his older brothers and raised his adopted son to also hate the government. Herbert taught Andros to become a tyrant in his own rights. At the end of 2313, days before the Yule celebration, Andros and his family were exiled to the Penal colony on Rathis, a moon of Yis. There, he would live out the rest of his days aiding the helium-3 mining efforts and actually helping the system he had hurt so dearly. 2314, the disappearance. In a rather sudden twist of events, loyalists to the Porcus doctrine rescued Dr. Andros from his prison and took him to Venom with the other separatists. No public records exist which reveal attempts to recapture him or return him to justice. Many Cornerians wonder if he was secretly executed. 2323. Rise of an Empire in the day Corneria stood still. Life had returned to a more peaceful way by this time. The scandals of the Andros trials and his subsequent disappearance had fallen out of the news cycles and out of people's minds. However, on Julio 13th at approximately 12-5 periods UTC, a massive subspace burst from Venom was directed straight to Corneria. All communications were overridden. Many electronic devices failed from the resulting EMP, and a single message was displayed for over an hour on any surviving mobile phones, view screens, and monitors. The message was simply this: the Andrazi Empire lives. Corneria stayed on high alert for months after that incident. Ultimately, the panic subsided when years passed without any real activity coming from Venom. The message was passed off as a madman's final laugh at Corneria's expense. However, those in power today are leery of what is happening underneath the clouds of Venom. 2329. General Pepper is elected Supreme General. Thanks to his efforts to safeguard Corneria and build a functioning defense force, General Pepper won the general election and became the 23rd Supreme General. Prime Minister Veshni Nasari wins the election for Prime Minister of Corneria. Both candidates won their respective elections in a landslide turnout. 2331. Negi 17 crashes into Yis. In a beautiful display of cosmic destruction, the comet Negi 17 crashes into the planet Yis. This event furthers Cornerians' understanding of cosmic events like this. 2333. Pepper's Folly. On a late night in Julia, according to General Pepper, the thought to be deceased Andros managed to send a holographic transmission to the general's office, where he supposedly taunted him and gloated about getting his revenge. When the general asked why Andros would tip his hand, the mad scientist said that his forces were already in position and that the CDF couldn't scramble fast enough to respond. That his defeat and Andros' revenge were at hand. General Pepper put the Cornerian Defense Force on high alert and scrambled all ships and fighters into a round-the-clock vigil. For nearly a month, all forces stayed on high alert, and the Corneria people were terrified that something would happen. However, nothing ever did. Surveillance of Venom showed that, like always, the planet was a dead world covered in toxic clouds. No ships had come or left. Other outposts confirmed that all was quiet in the outer colonies. The general was humiliated and ostracized for the incident. Many believe that he made it up to keep military budgets increasing and to keep himself in power. The general refused these accusations and did offer to resign, but the other government leaders declined his offer. Surprisingly, he even won re-election the next year. 2340. Nasari's New Deal. At the end of 2340, prior to the Yule holidays, Prime Minister Nasari announces a new reformation to dwindle military spending by 65% in order to focus on new colonization efforts and to address the problem with overcrowding the limited land allocated for artificial habitat on Corneria. The public opinion is met with mostly positive views, 62% approval, 36% disapproval, and 2% undecided. 2341, present day. On Kalkori 12th, 2341, Andros is walking along Venom with his son, both of them wearing a breathing mask, and each look up at the sky as large carriers are waiting to leave the system. Father, the boy says in Simian. Yes, my son? Why are we invading them again? The father gives his son a stern, unyielding look. For all their vengeful ignorance, they spat upon my father and my father's father. They fear greatness and cower in piteous shadows. They are weak, my son. They deny us our rights, so we shall deny them their life. The boy looks dismayed. I'm sorry, Father, I don't understand. The simian looks down at his son and smiles. You are still young, but in time the answer will come. Father? Another question, my son? Yes. How did you get so many to fight for you? Andros looks down at the boy and smiles. They do not fight for me, son. They fight for the beast. The beast? The simian kneels down. All are born with the beast inside of them, a creature of terrible darkness and strength. It takes but a push to unleash that darkness. And those men, those good men, will shed their guise of righteousness and dignity. They will tear and rape and kill to sate that which cannot be sated. The rivers of Corneria will run red. Those men will toss children from the ramparts, slay their brethren, and worse, much worse. And the universe will be all better for it. Darkness, my boy. Darkness will reign so that you and I may walk in the light. In the background, a battle carrier raises off the ground, its row upon row upon row of weapons gleaming in the sunlight. And that is it for the timeline. The next video I'll start getting into the game and start introducing characters to you. You'll be able to meet JAHXD51, the murder robot, Lilac Fox, the cute but terrifying purple fox, Monteblanc Talpa, the psychotic mad scientist mole, D's Newts, the cocky drunk war veteran squirrel, and Chocolate Moose, the lady killer but only in his head muscle man. So that is it for today. Have a wonderful day, and remember, gamers don't get older, they level up.